welcome to Sustainable Strategy Brief Live, episode 4. I'm Rob Smith. You may know me as a former BBC presenter and journalist. I have a very keen interest in the environment and sustainability, and I'm going to be moderating this session alongside Dr. Paul Phillips. Dr. Phillips, very well known in the business world, of course, as an academic, former director of the Kent Business School, somebody with a forensic interest in what makes for a genuinely sustainable strategy in business. And that brings us to the point of today's briefing. What happens when sustainability ambition enters the finance room? Now, across the first 3 Sustainable Strategy Brief programs, viewers made one thing really clear, and that was that capital logic needs more attention. Not because sustainability leaders are lacking in ambition, but because many sustainability strategies still struggle to show how value is created and protected and funded and measured and governed. So episode 4 goes straight to this pressure point, which is why all too often sustainable strategy fails the CFO scrutiny test. And our guest for this episode to discuss all these things is Mark J Lumsdon-Taylor, the Global Executive Lead, Development and Sustainability at MHA, UK member firm of Baker Tilly International, and a leading professional services provider of audit and assurance, tax, accountancy, and advisory services, internationally respected, a real big hitter. Mark, it's great to have you with us today. We were just chatting off air before we came on. You've got a couple of other titles that you wanted to bring into play today, an announcement to make.
Yeah, so I've been involved in the food and agricultural industries pretty much most of my working career since 2004-05. Didn't know much about milking in dairies, but at 5 a.m. in knee deep in cow doings, I learned. So I've just recently been appointed as the global head of the food sector for MHA PLC Baker Tilly International, and I'm also the president of the Rural Policy Group, which is a totally independent think tank that fights for the fair distribution of the food price margin, but also as well looks at the valuation, which is something we'll be talking about today, of the food sector, and treats it like a PLC and gets it into the heart of government, because people don't necessarily see the food industry as a huge component of the economic chain, but it's massive. We're always talking about automotive or talking about IT or AI, but we all need to eat, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, excellent. I'm very delighted, and I'm also I'll mention later, but I'm also heavily involved in the United Nations GC Global Compact as well. So recently won some awards there, but we can talk about that later.
Excellent. So we've got some great stuff to talk about here. And as we've just been hearing, I mean, you've talked to many CEOs, lots of senior leadership teams across all sorts of different sectors in your career. So what we want to look at is when you have that situation where the sustainability strategy, it looks really persuasive. In the ESG report, it looks like this is a great thing. And then you put it in front of the chief financial officer and he looks at it and he's wanting evidence, he's wanting cash timing, he's wanting to look about downside risk, all of these kinds of things. So where does the strategy often fall over first?
I think the first thing and the most important thing is that the definition of what sustainability is means different things to different people. And if you go all the way back and dial it right the way back, the original definition of sustainability actually was linked to corporate social responsibility back in the day. Obviously, I'm far too young to remember the CSR days, but obviously you're not. But obviously, joke. But obviously, that kind of governed. And in those days, it was kind of the Andrew Carnegie definition of, well, let's make plenty of money, and then if that works really well, we'll do some good. We maybe make an effective change. Those days are gone, and with sustainability, environmental social governance, which was created in the 80s, actually a USA thing, a USA premise, which came out of the United Nations of the Brundtland definition, which basically said, do whatever you do to the planet and the environment, you must effectively restore and put back. That is the principle of environmental social governance and sustainability. ESG is a reporting mechanism of that. And when the CFO looks at this and their sustainability strategy, they invariably say, okay, so sustainability, effectively what we do as an organization. But what are we doing in terms of our environmental social governance frameworks? Because that underpins sustainability. And more often than not, people don't necessarily understand that. So first and foremost, CFO will get a sustainability strategy and go for, okay, well, what does it mean? Is it credible? Has it had any external scrutiny? Has it been challenged? Is it assured? In other words, has it gone through external scrutiny? And are we expected to have to comply with external scrutiny? I won't make this a technical regulatory piece, but I think it's important to understand that. Sorry, I just think this. Anyway, the second piece is the financial controller, the financial CFO will also say, well, what's the control environment? Is it linked to processes, systems, procedures? Is it auditable? Are our auditors going to turn around and go, this is really nice what you've written in the financial statements, but does it actually mean anything? And can it be tested? And then the third element as well is what happens if somebody turns around externally, customer, bank, supplier, and go, oh, it's fantastic what you've said about the work you're doing around the environment, let's say around water and conservation. Prove it. Prove it. And you turn and go, well, we wrote it in our report, but we didn't really mean it because we don't do it. And as a CFO, those are the hard questions you must ask. I will go on to kind of return on investment and capital employed and how much is it costing me. But just to give you into a narrative, if any CFO listening to this thinks, oh, you know what, this is a great way to generate more business. Yes, you might be able to do that. But if you think you're going to get a short-term win out of this, think again. I've been involved in this since 2006. I was on Prince Charles's A4S group, accounting for sustainability. I won't use jargon. And at Hadlow College, it took us a decade to implement effective change and create value in the proposition, which was in the curriculum and in the student output. M&S, Marks and Spencer, remember what the most famous quote in sustainability in the business world? Plan A, because there is no plan B. It took them over 10 years to see that return, and you only need to look at their market cap to see how they've done it. So that would be the first kind of the hard-hitting questions I would ask, and CFOs do ask us of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Paul, I know you were listening intently, making some notes there. What's your thoughts?
I just had a couple of points to that really good explanation there by Mark. The first thing I find is this sort of counterfactuals. The data is presented by the sustainability professionals and with all good intent. And then when they go to the CFO, and I've been in that situation, when they come and you say a hard question, such as, what happens if we do nothing? And sometimes doing nothing has got a cost attached to it, or even a benefit. So what I'm trying to say there is that we have to look at the what if analysis, which now with all this AI around us and people learning Excel through AI, this can be done very, very easily. But I do find in my experience it tends to be overlooked a bit, i.e. the ability of doing nothing, which is the counterfactual. And then the other side I'd say would be the downside risk. Again, when we say the downside risk, it's like when you receive this money, what happens afterwards? And I know from personal experiences that once you receive the money from these investment banks and these money men, they're on you like a rash when it finishes. So you've got to make sure that you cover these downside risks, which they build in models. So I'd say those are two things that I would ask if I was in that situation.
Okay, so when a CFO is looking at a new sustainability initiative, what then are the kind of the top three things that a sustainability team is probably wanting to hide a bit, brush under the carpet, the thing that they're least prepared to answer, Paul?
With my strategy hat on, I would say a very clear one would be, is the strategy going to be defensive or offensive? I notice a lot of the commentators and the analysts talk about that, and we can know from the football analogy what that's all about. And the thing about it is that if you are pursuing the defensive or an offensive, they require certain talent capability within the organisation, and that is something that I would look at very, very closely. And then the other thing would be the word I would say would be value. Is this going to be creating new value, i.e., fresh value? Is it about maintaining current value, or is it something that's going to be disruptive? Or is it incremental? So the rate of pace, because I think in strategy, cadence is very important. And the third area I would say is all about capital allocation. You know, has this been written in the CFO language? And in just recent conversations I've been having, people have put it to me that part of the challenge is one of language and mindsets. And I'll stop for there, but I think those are two areas that are very, very important to this.
Well, let's bring Mark back into it then.
Yeah.
Mark, what are the things that you think that the sustainability teams are least prepared or willing to answer?
Again, I see very different types of sustainability teams. I'll give you a couple of lenses. So at a global level, with very large, globally listed, multi-jurisdictional corporates, even the most sophisticated teams, when the CFO says how much and what's my outcome and when, they won't be able to answer that coherently. They can give some kind of generalist answer and everything else, but the CFO is tough, like I was. Okay. So how much? Because in this current really tough geopolitical times, you know, sustainability was kind of perceived to take a back seat. It hasn't taken a back seat. You only look at what's going on in Asia Pacific and the emergence of major regulations. Businesses need to be prepared. So that's number one. And they're not prepared for it. And I have done it in both sides. When I've asked my lot, when I was the CFO, CEO, Hadlow, and I'd asked them, well, how much? Where's my, when am I going to effectively get it back? The second one is, what happens if you're wrong? So you tell me all of this, and you tell us that we're going to do all of this, whether it's integration of the environment within the business. And remember, ESG is not just about carbon and environment, societal impact, supply chain, modern slavery, which I know we'll talk about no doubt later. So what happens if you're wrong? And underpinning that is that, let's say you get this wrong and my customers or my suppliers turn around and go, we need all of this information, and I come to you and he or she says, we haven't got it. What then? And I think that I agree with Paul about that kind of cultural piece. It's the teams will often go, no, this is going to be great. This is the plan. It's going to be fine. But actually, in reality, it's the risk scenario of, well, what happens if it doesn't go right? They're the two I'd say that they're least prepared for. And when I'm advising or I'm providing assurance, as well as heading up MH's internal policies, I challenge that all the time, and no one yet has got it. No one yet has met both questions. No one.
Right. Okay. So it's clearly it's a tough thing to do, isn't it, to actually get through this?
It is.
If we're looking at stuff from an advisory and assurance perspective, what makes that that sort of sustainability baseline credible enough to actually make sure that you are willing to put some finance behind it and give it that allocation, rather than just looking at it as reporting compliance level? Mark.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I'll just give you a couple of points. I know Paul, no doubt, have a lot from his experience at University of Kent. Is the audit trail, and I'm obviously expected to say that. I've been a corporate auditor most of my career, but if there is not proof or evidence of a timeline of work, not just I put it in place now to satisfy the regulators or I've to satisfy my customers, indefensible. And I've learnt this through the hard way. I've also learnt this positively too. That's number one. The second one is the data, and you may be saying this, Paul, as well, is the data true? Every single number has traceability in it, everything. And you cannot rely on artificial intelligence to tell you that. You need to have provenance in your data. And if you don't have that, it's absolutely not credible. And if any bank, investor worth their salt doesn't do that, then if they lose their money, then that's on them.
Paul?
I would say, yeah, just to pick on some of those points. The first thing I'd say, when we talk about assurance, are we talking about something that is what I would call term assurance ready, as opposed to something with a very nice narrative, looks nice, and I've noticed that sometimes things are not assurance ready, and then you have to go back and have meetings, and these meetings can go on for a while to try to make it assurance ready, like some of the points which Mark has mentioned. So I'd say that was number one. And number two would be the numbers. We'll probably talk about this later on, but it's kind of like, if you look at it from an operational perspective, the numbers are the numbers for the initiatives, in terms of the costs, the inputs, the capex expenditure. When they're all totaled up across what I call a bridge, where do they hit the P&L account, and what is the actual outcome for all of this? So, i.e., is this really all worth doing? Do these numbers stack up in a way? And it's different. I noticed the firms have different techniques. I play around with what I call a bridge, and this is something that's really helpful and useful as an exercise for organisations. And the third area would be, what is this all about? What are you proposing to do that's going to change the business? Because that will then give you an additional risk profile. To the risk people then will kick in and say, if you're going to do AI, if you're going to do cyber security, if you're going to do cost reduction, this changes it for the lens of the CFO. And I see Mark, and I'm sure it's got something good to say. So you finish off.
I think that's a really, really good point. And just to kind of expand on that, I see businesses in two spheres. One, those that are doing this because they have to, because they're regulated. They need to do it for their customers, they need to do it for their suppliers, and they need to do it for the banks and the insurance, etc., 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 right? And it depends on the sector they're in. I deal with oil and gas, I deal with consumer, right? Food obviously being the main sector. And that's one type. The other type, of course, is those that absolutely believe and embed it within their whole business, within their risk methodology, within their actual structure as an organization and their brand. And I'll give you an analogy. There are supermarkets in the chain, right? There are particular supermarkets that eat, sleep, breathe this. The one I referred to earlier is a case in point. And then there are others that simply comply. And you don't really see any of that embedded in their brand behaviors or dynamics. They're just simply doing minimum compliance. And you have to kind of choose where you want to be. And I think that Paul's point is really important, because that totally determines the lens. Because if they're just doing it from a compliance perspective, it's all about the bottom line. But if they're doing it as part of their whole business model, then there is a process around actually affecting that change and doing the right, what a good corporate citizen. And that's something that I always advocated when I was in education, but also as a firm here, we're trying to be a good corporate citizen.
So I want to move it on just a little bit for a moment. And when we're talking about companies and their sustainable strategies, the obvious things are stuff like reducing carbon footprint, keeping the reputation of the business in a good place, you just talked about there, and stakeholder goodwill is something else that's, they're probably the three obvious things that people will be thinking about. What are the other things that you really need to be thinking about beyond those to make that case genuinely work, Paul?
Well, I think in my experiences, and I found in writing the book and speaking to the people and whatever, one of them is like, we can all remember when we were at primary school, the first time at primary school, and we had to take tests, didn't we? Obviously, over time, they've all changed the names, but we ought to take these tests. And essentially, they're all about a baseline, weren't they, to decide which group you would go into. It's probably changed now, but in
the sorting hat.
In my day, it was very much, you take these baseline tests and you would then be put into a group. And sometimes people never changed the group they were in from primary school, but that's probably why it had to change at some stage. But anyway, the term I want to use is baseline. We need to know the baseline and make sure it's very verifiable, credible, and properly. Because imagine taking a test like that and it's wrong, it could harm you for a period of time. So the baseline is how they verify it. What I've noticed from doing strategy retreats in particular, where they give you a nice, fantastic strategic a strategy and a strategic plan that is fantastic looking at it. But then when you look at it, you say, well, where did you get this bit of the strategy from? And you realise they just use the mindset and the organisation. They've not got external views about things. So the baseline is very important, I would say. The other thing is about ownership. Who actually owns all of this? Because the executives teams that I come across, everybody's very busy. So when you have a new initiative, who takes ownership of that? And without ownership, it's going to fail. So I think ownership is another one. An executive owner. And then thirdly, I would say the decision gate. When did we decide to pause and stop and go and sprint? These are all a part of the cadence, if I may say. That has to be shown, and then that can help us know when we need to make the investments, when we need to hire people, which is the next point, the review cadence of everything. And then the last point is that once an initiative is up and running, executives can be scared to stop it, to kill it, as I've written about. When do you kill the initiative? There've got to be metrics and rubrics around for that. So I would say those are the things that I've experienced and I would look for above the points that we made at the beginning.
Okay, Mark, you were nodding away there as well.
No, it's a nodding sagely because of my learned level 8 academic. I don't know how many professorships and doctorates you have. I'm only level 7. I'm only MSc. I've got 2, granted, but one ACA, FCA. But I was just reflecting on what you were saying, and Rob's points, kind of like all the kind of what I call in my world the low-hanging fruit. And when I speak, I spoke at the UNGC, United Nations Global Compact UK Assembly annual conference last year, and I was on the debating panel with chap from Linklaters, obviously lawyers, and we were discussing the role of regulation and whether it acts as a hindrance or a driver. People just become very compliance orientated rather than affecting change. And every single debating point we had, and there was a load of other people on the debate on the panel, was about people. And I actually think the answer to your question is around individuals and their behaviors. So, for example, we are a global accountancy firm, employ something like 3,000 people. It was just under 400 when I first trained here. And we're 85% of our costs are people, right? So if we didn't engage them in our processes and in our philosophy as an organization, every single policy, procedure, process, complete waste of time, wouldn't work from a sustainability and an ESG perspective. So I think often the hidden dynamic in any strategy, not just sustainability, is have you got the right people doing the right job with the right lens, as Paul said, the sorting hat or which class you went into, the able or the less able, to be completely politically correct. I've seen this in my whole career when I ran a big organization and when I'm part of one. The people dynamic, it's also almost impossible to get right. We've all been in situations, right, where there are people that maybe haven't necessarily fit the mold, and how you manage that, and then the unintended consequences of that. So I would say planning that within your sustainability strategy, it comes back to we have a societal license in MHA, which is about how we behave to our people and then how we expect our people to behave externally. Because if we were an unprofessional, toxic environment, how are our staff going to go and conduct themselves to clients? Equally, had the same process in Hadlow College Group. If we didn't behave correctly, how would they then train those students? Same at University of Kent, I imagine, Paul. And I think that link is often forgotten when it comes to sustainability. It's not just about reports and controls.
So when we look at an organisation and they're building a new sustainability strategy, and they're looking to embed it, put it all in place, you can have real problems, I guess, if you don't have the correct assurance and governance and control systems put in place to actually make sure that you embed them properly, that it has time to actually, you're saying with Marks and Spencer, it took 10 full years for it to actually start to bear fruit. So unless you have those systems in place to defend your strategy, then it's going to fall over, isn't it? So talk a little bit about that, how organizations leave themselves exposed if they don't actually robustly bed those systems in, Mark.
Yeah, and again, this is quite a complicated topic and quite a complicated question, because when businesses look at things like sustainability and other strategies as well, or environmental social governance, they think, okay, let's put an environmental plan in, let's make sure the staff do good charity work and da 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 da. But they don't think holistically about how somebody else will look at it. So more often than not, what brings these things down is the external lens. Now, for larger businesses, and I'll just mention a couple of technical points, the regulations have been around since 2019. I think Boris Johnson put those mandatory, first one in the world to put in legal mandatory reporting requirements under the listing rules for listed companies, and then they put them in place for large companies over 500 million, 500 staff. Those regulations in terms of reporting are now cascading down under the new rules called UK SRS, and we'll see those come out in 27. They've already been agreed for listed companies from January 27, and it's a big step change. And this is an important point for those listening who might think, it doesn't bother me, it's listed companies, don't need to worry about any of that. Wrong. I'll tell you for why. So those companies are mandated to look at their emissions, to look at their the way in which they conduct themselves, society, and also the way in which they manage it. Now, with emissions, Scope 1 is your own, effectively, gas, combustion, stuff that you have yourselves. Scope 2 is electricity. But Scope 3 is everything else. Now, no one's got this right. And you look at the stream. So you have your, right at the very top, so let's take the food industry because it's my world. Your food producers, your farmers, which is the upstream, all the way down to the person that eats it. And all of that chain will create emissions, right? And those emissions, whether that's their electricity or their oil and gas or whatever, becomes that listed company's Scope 3 emissions, because they have to report mandatorily 1 and 2, and under the new rules, likely Scope 3, which means they have to ask you for it. So if you don't have that in place and you aren't recording it, you haven't got systems, even if you'll be a 200, 300, 400, 10 million pound company, you'll be somewhere in the supply chain. And I always use the example of a well-known apple fillings producer in Kent that's now owned by a large corporate. We supported that. Every hot cross bun or cake that you buy in this country, invariably, those fillings will have come from this particular company. All the way back to where the apples fall off the tree. Well, not fall off the trees, they go into the baskets because we leave the stuff on the ground. But that, all the way through the chain, through production, to purchase, to then manufacture, to then prepare for consumer, to the supermarket, to then to the consumer, all has emissions. How is that then controlled? And who's checking it? And if you don't have that in place, do you think the likes of M&S or another one will go, we need all your emissions, we don't have it. We're going to continue working with you. I'm not sure whether they will, because they're mandated to do it. And I think this important is so missed by the SME chain, not just food, but oil and gas, manufacture, construction, etc., 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 etc. So, without going into too much more detail, the role of regulations, such as it's called Provision 29, which is a audit code of governance requirement, corporate code of governance requirement, or international standards and assurance. These are things that you can start to be considering, and also get someone in, not us, to kick the tires. Somebody like, I don't know, Paul, Rob, another, to go, well, are you really doing this? And what are your processes? Because if you don't, I'm making a prediction, but is the planet getting better? Is it warming up or not warming up? It's not going great, is it? How many tons of CO2 have been emitted in Iran and Ukraine because of the war? Anyone added that up? It's millions. We haven't personally, but we've checked it. It's millions. Who's recording that? It's not going great, is it? So we have to do these things. So I would say that's where you need to be changing your narrative. It's not just okay to say, oh yes, we plant trees. So what? So what? map it.
It's
Sorry,
really
and I'm going to stop talking because
yeah,
I
no,
feel
no,
very
yeah, but it's
strongly
interesting
about
because
this.
fundamentally, Paul, I guess what this comes down to is actually knowing what your data is, where to find it, how you can get your hands on it, and being able to properly prove it.
And I guess, sorry, and Paul, just kind of continue the conversation a minute.
Mm.
There will be people saying, "Oh well, it doesn't." But there are lower level regulations called streamlined energy, carbon, and environmental savings. Which one is the Environment Agency, the other one is the Department of Business and Trade. They've been around for quite some time about reporting emissions. If you're basically a large company, under the Companies Act definition, I won't go into all of that. And they've been doing it for a long time, but a lot of them get it wrong because they don't think it through properly, and also as well they go, oh, it's a compliant. Comes back to the earlier point. Well, what's the benefit to the business? You've got to do it. It's going to cost you some money, so why don't you make it a benefit? Create something out of it. And I think that's where again businesses go wrong and they're exposed. And I've just a very very important thing. So governance and it's like regulation always catches up, doesn't it? I always use the mobile phone piece. When we were younger and mobile phones first came out, right? What could we do legally in the car? Hold it to our ear and make calls, right? 4 or 5 years later, I think the regulations caught up. The Lord said you can't do that anymore. You've got to be hands-free or Bluetooth. But for years, people just had it to their ear, driving along, changing the cassette or CD. Cassette in your place, Rob, but CD in mine.
Cheeky.
And I think it's the same with ESG. The regulations are catching up now, and you've got to be ahead of the game. But they are definitely catching up. We've learned auditors are better at this stuff. I won't go into all the techie stuff now, but things have changed. And that's not scaremongering, Rob, but it's an important point I think we need to dissect.
Totally. So, Paul, I'll take you back to the question that I asked Mark in the first place. When organisations are most exposed when they build strategies faster than they build the systems, the assurance, the governance to defend them, where are they most exposed?
I would say in my book, in my recent book, I talk about a phenomenon, something that I observed around transition. Organisations are looking to move from point A to point B over a period of time, and I created this sort of a 5-phase stage for transitions. So, and the stages were, just very briefly, was about compliance and reporting, where people felt relatively comfortable with that. They brought the staff in for doing that. They had the CSOs in place. They were making the right announcements. They were producing the sustainability reports. I mean, some of these sustainability reports are a work of art, and they are 200 pages plus. And I'm thinking, well, do we still need a strategy document? They just put everything. But anyway, that's enough for another conversation. I'm not my expert area, but I'm just saying that they look very nice and glossy. And then I would say the next part is the need to speak to people outside of the environment, the external organization. So I'm talking about forming strategic partnerships. That's a very important thing in this day and age, and now with the technology around us. So how can we form strategic partnerships with the right people? And I just find there are so many sources of helping you do networking and finding strategic partnerships. There is something out there in this sustainability space, and I spoke to an organization that were trying to model the space, because what is sustainability? Where are the boundaries? And I think that it's just an open thing. So moving on, the third area is very important, is to create value creation, which we've talked about today. That has got to be shown very, very, very clearly through what we've said. And then the next phase is implementation, probably worth another discussion on its own, but implementation, let's leave it there. That's a big problem. The thing I've taken away just recently from speaking to people is that the implementation problem may not be bigger than the sustainable strategy creation side. So what I'm saying, if you've got a weak strategy, it's nothing to do with implementation, because you've just got a weak strategy. So you can't just say, I've got an implementation strategy. You've got to look back to your sustainable strategy and make sure that it's fit for purpose. I don't see many places actually evaluating the sustainable strategy, i.e. the quality of it, as they used to evaluate the quality of strategic planning back in the past. Anyway.
Just on that, could I ask a question, Rob?
Yeah.
Paul, how have you seen businesses evaluate the quality of their strategies in the past then around sustainability? Because I think it's a really tough question to answer. I won't say what I've seen, but I'd just like to really get your view on that.
Well, I would say that what I have seen and what I have done, two different things. I mean, what I have seen, people use a lot of proxies. It's a bit like when you have performance and you have the black box. So nobody knows what's inside the black box. They look in what goes before you get into the black box and what you have as an outcome to look at the quality. But that's obviously not really good because you're not dealing with causation, for example. Just because something is doing very well, you don't know why it's doing well. So from an academic research, a lot of problems there. But for me, I mean, I was looking at the quality part in my doctoral stuff way back, and it's about actually going into the organization, sleeves up, and getting under identifying the key processes. As one of my professors would say, it's about process-based management. It's kind of disappeared, but if you don't understand your processes, then and the trouble is, strategy is a qualitative process. So everybody has their little proxy and way of doing it. And I think that's a huge area, like something that interests me from coming through stuff. But anyway, the last part is an important part: institutional impact. This is very important in public sector organisations. That's how they live and breathe. It's about the impact that they make. If they don't make the right impact, then they don't get funding anymore. Organisations is also about impact. And it's not about profit. It's about making, and Mark touched upon this, making the right. He talked about the societal company, and MHA is a nice place to work. They behave.
It is. Yeah,
This bit is getting lost in organisations, and some people would say to me that some organisations do something completely different and doing very, very well. But again, another conversation on that one. So those are the things. It's what I talk about. Sorry.
Okay, well, we've got to sort of draw the conversation to a close, really, just for timing's sake. So, Mark, perhaps I could ask you then, what should, in pragmatic terms, over the next 3 months, next 90 days, should leaders in the sustainability strategy sphere be doing to make their strategy more CFO ready, board ready, actually investable?
It's a good question, actually. And again, I was actually at a board meeting for a really huge listed FTSE 100 top 10, supporting their sustainability team, presenting their strategy. So with their assurance providers, and that question was asked. Funnily enough, not quite the same way you've asked it, but very similar. And the response was by the team: we need to be honest with ourselves. And we need to have a really good, honest assessment or talk to a conversation with ourselves. And they pointed at us. And this isn't a plug for business, by the way, it really isn't. And they said, we need to be running stress tests with a critical third eye to look at it and go, is it what they say? I mean, their reports are beautiful. It's glossy. It's absolutely outstanding. But is it true? And I think having that honest conversation with yourself to say, let's stress test it. Let's get a critical third eye and see whether or not it's actually what they say it is. That's number one. And then number two would be, is our strategy future-proof? Did you say for the next 90 days? Is it fit for purpose where we know what's coming down the track? And we know that these things are coming down the track, even if the regulations don't affect you, but there'll be a business in your customers or your suppliers that it will. I will bet everything I have that it will. And I learned from tough experience in my former life when we were running the group and we built it, is that customers and suppliers care about two things invariably: how much and who's doing it. So when I get paid. And you have to weave that into the narrative. So I think they're the two biggest things I would say. For the next 90 days, if you have time, and you're a CFO, have that conversation with your head of sustainability, or invariably what happens is usually the sustainability person might even be the CFO more often than not. And they need to have a conversation with themselves, ideally in a mirror, and ask them those tough questions. And I bet you they'll be found wanting, because there's always something, Rob, Paul. No one's perfect. No one. Apart from maybe you, Rob.
Well, there is that. There is that.
Maybe.
Paul, so final thought from yourself then. I mean, what would your recommendation be, for the next 90 days? Just one thing to actually make sure you get going to push this stuff in the right direction.
I would say, I mean, Mark said a couple that I had in my mind, so that was interesting.
Sorry.
I would say about the cockpit, what I call it, is like organisations have all these different measurements and metrics that they follow and whatever. Is basically looking to see how they're achieving each of the demands of the CSO. Sorry, the CFO, how they meeting those demands, and are they on track? Because what normally happens when the big guys come in and they wave their arms and say all these brilliant, fantastic stuff, everyone nods their heads and says, yeah, this is great. When they go out the door, everybody's back to normal, aren't they? Everything gets forgotten. So I think that there is a need that the advisors are back in to create something after when the door is closed, so to speak. I think there should be a continuation, so the project should not be just say 12 months. It could be 18 months, where 6 months is just monitoring what's going on.
Good point.
I would say that is something, and I'm very conscious of the time, so I'll stop it there.
Well, I think we'll have to more or less draw things to a close there. But it's been really fascinating having a chat through all this stuff. And Mark, thank you ever so much for being with us today. The fact that you brought such a breadth of experience from so many different areas, and we were chatting just before we came on air in former lives with the Kent County show, for instance, and this stuff.
Yes,
we're talking about things that are really hands-on, real projects. And from my perspective, a thing that is really important is that thing of making sure the people who are at the top table, at the C-suite, buy into this stuff emotionally, and therefore they can find a way of actually baking this stuff in. Because if they're only paying lip service to it, they're only paying lip service to it. And there's always that element of making sure that the people who are going to implement this stuff at the top end believe it themselves. And I think that coming up with a convincing strategy that means that from a business perspective, they understand it, they get it, they can see the return on it, that makes it an awful lot easier to push that through. So have I got hold of the right end of the stick there?
I think you have. And it's, tell you what I think, and actually I'll end on this it's more than simply a set of rules, all of this. It is an underpinning philosophy that changes the dynamics of your organization. And if you use it right, you can do so well. If you use it wrong, more fool you. And I've learned from bitter experience, good and bad, that how to do it. So my best advice is look in the mirror.
Excellent. Final word from you, Paul?
I would say one of the things to consider would be the pushbacks that are involved in this change. It's a tough journey. We're seeing instances of fatigue in the industry, the leadership teams, and that's probably because of the stakeholders that are now involved with different needs and demands. So I will say is just look after yourself whilst you're going through this journey, but there are people around that can help. So share the pain.
Excellent. Well, it's been a really enjoyable conversation, gentlemen. Thank you ever so much, Mark Lumsdon-Taylor and Professor Dr. Paul Phillips. Thank you both for being with us, and looking forward to the next Sustainable Strategy Briefing live in a few weeks' time. We'll be publishing the date on that very shortly to let you know when it's going to be, who we're talking to, and what our key subject will be. But that from us for the moment is it. Thank you very much for being with us this lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.